Okay, good morning everyone, and you're very welcome. It's always great to see so many faces on the screen. This particular session is on what we consider to be a very, very important topic. It's about keeping volunteers safe. And I suppose safety has been one of those massive issues throughout the pandemic, in terms of, we've learned a lot of new concepts about social distancing, washing hands, as if that wasn't a new concept, but it certainly has become more and more important. Wearing masks, all those sorts of things have become a part of life. As time went on, increasingly there was awareness of well-being, and we heard more and more talk about social and emotional well-being. And unfortunately, there's always a few not so nice people out there, and so therefore the whole issue of safeguarding and keeping people safe from harm also became prevalent throughout the pandemic as well. Key to the whole period of time over this past few months, and certainly at the heart of everything, has been volunteers. And increasingly you'll see that so many things could not have happened without volunteers. So naturally for us, the whole idea of keeping volunteers safe within that wider context is absolutely and utterly crucial. And we have had volunteers on what we would call the front line in terms of shopping, driving, delivering prescriptions. We've also had volunteers involved in supporting vulnerable people, either through befriending or through just check-in and chat on the telephone. Then there's also been the volunteers who have been stepped down because their volunteering lifeline has actually been taken away because they haven't been able to fulfill their role. So clearly the whole idea of volunteers within this pandemic, the whole idea of what they've been doing and making sure that they are safe and well is critical. So I'm delighted this morning that we have a couple of speakers who are going to share some of their perspectives on keeping their volunteers safe during this pandemic. And in a few moments, I'm going to ask them to come and share with us. And just so as you know who else you're looking at on the screen, rather than go around everyone, wouldn't really have time to do that. You will have the opportunity to input towards the end. But I just want to let you know that in terms of representation this morning, we have those people who are involved with disability. We have people involved in culture, preservation, the environment, health, community, animals, criminal justice, education. We have trusts here and we have councils here. So already you can get a feel for the range of organisations who are interested in keeping their volunteers safe. So first off, I'm going to invite Robin from the Red Cross to share their experiences over this past few months in terms of keeping their volunteers safe. Then I'm going to just ask Elaine from Good Morning Carrick to come in and talk about what they have been doing. And then I have asked Ruth, our own safeguarding manager, to come in at the end and maybe just pick up on a few of the safeguarding messages that we certainly have been very aware of over the last few months. So without any further ado, Robin, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. I would say to everybody else, if you just keep yourself muted, and then once the speakers are finished, we will have the opportunity for each of you to ask questions and reflect on what you've heard. So Robin, over to you.
Hi everyone, so my name's Robin. I'm the service manager for independent living for the Red Cross in Belfast. So I just thought, I've written down a few things here because I've got the memory of a goldfish, so forgive me if you see me looking down. So obviously the past few months have been absolutely crazy, and it's just been really important just to make sure our volunteers still feel involved and valued, even though a lot of our business as usual services had actually finished because with COVID you couldn't still facilitate them services. A lot of them were out in the community. We had more contracts coming in with the Belfast Trust and with the Belfast City Council, And that was very similar stuff to what you were talking about, Sandra, where it comes to delivering medications, delivering food packages, facilitating shopping for people, and also doing safe and well calls for those who maybe are feeling a bit isolated or lonely. So it was important for us to give our volunteers that opportunity to be redeployed if they wanted to, but also for those that were still continuing with our business as usual services that were still affected by COVID, because obviously we've had to completely change the way that they work, making sure that there's new guidelines and everything else. So it was really important to us to make sure that we were giving them training and support to be able to do this. We at the Red Cross have an online platform, a learning platform called Fuse on our Red Room. So we have been trying to make up more e-learning modules that volunteers can access and facilitate. We also have been trying to facilitate more Zooms with our learning and development team. And these were all free, and we were trying to support volunteers to be able to take these on so that they feel equipped to be able to go out into the new COVID world in their volunteering role. It was also really important to us because we know that even ourselves, everyone's complete lives were turned upside down, and we had new working lives, new personal lives were affected. You know, a lot of people had their kids at home where that would have been their volunteering time. So it was important for us to try and be flexible around these new schedules and make sure that by doing this, we just had to really keep our communication line open with our volunteers, having regular check-ins, seeing what works for them, and us as staff being as flexible as possible in order to make sure that they still were able to keep their volunteering roles. It was also really important for us to be flexible. A lot of our volunteers in independent living especially would be over 70s, and we had quite a few volunteers that were in the shielding category. So it was important for us to make sure that we had roles there for them that they could still facilitate even though they were at home. So we did make sure that a lot of those volunteers did the safe and well call check-ins with people in the community. And it was just important for us to get that right training and support for them to do that. So in terms of keeping people safe and volunteers safe, when it came to those on the front line who were delivering the medication, food, we also have an assisted discharge service out of the Royal. So that was really frontline, you know, bringing people home directly from hospital. That service really escalated because a lot of people couldn't get picked up by their family members in hospital. So we were just really making sure that we had enough PPE for everyone and making sure volunteers and even staff knew how to use volunteer PPE correctly. And we made up PPE packs and we had them sitting in our office in Heron Road, but we also made it our responsibility to make sure that volunteers were able to get them, whether it be posting it out to them or delivering it to them ourselves. In terms of also our food packs were in our office in Heron Road. So the volunteers would have had to come to Heron Road to be able to pick up the food packs to deliver them to people in the community. So we had to kind of make sure that not everyone was coming in at the same time. So we developed a rota system to make sure that everyone wasn't coming in at the same time. Everyone had their own slot to be able to come in and get the food packs. And everyone had to sign in. So it did give us that safety measure. If someone did get COVID, we knew exactly who would have been in the office at that set time. And then of course everyone had to wear PPE when coming in and out of the office, and also making sure that it was all sanitized after everyone was using it or touching anything. In terms of lone working, a lot of our volunteers would be going out in their own cars and on their own delivering these services. So for us, whenever we were coordinating the referrals, it was important for us to find out as much information as where our volunteers were going. Were they going to a flat where they may have to be in a lift, which is going to be an extra safety measure? Would the service user be able to come down and pick up the package at the front of their house? So that was just important for us so that our volunteers were kind of prepared as to what they were going into. And we have a regular check-in system. So there's a set person every day that the volunteers need to check in with, which we did on a rota basis, or we did it a different person for different services. So one person to check in with food packs, one person to check in with medication. And that was just in case of an emergency, and also so that we could check in with them every day and see how their day went. I think that was a good opportunity, because sometimes I think volunteers just needed a rant, say something happened. You know yourselves, whenever you were out in the community, people would give you the wrong address, even though you'd already confirmed it on the phone. I think that was good, just so that they had someone to talk to at the end of the day. So we also did regular debriefs, and that gave the volunteers an opportunity to kind of see what was going well and what wasn't going well with them. In terms of the way that we were operating the service, it was good for us to be able to find things to tweak and change from their point of view, because as they were the ones out on the ground. It was also important for us, in terms of keeping them safe, to make sure that they had the most up-to-date guidance. Our medication form system and our food pack system, we had to fill out certain forms that would go up on our systems. And we also had, I don't know about you guys, but whenever it came to Red Cross, the guidance for handling money or going into shops and people's houses changed on a regular basis, like on a daily basis. So it was important for us to make sure that every volunteer knew exactly what the changes were, even though it could be a bit frustrating every single day saying, actually, this has changed now. But it was really important for us to keep them safe, to make sure that they knew about those changes. And probably the most important thing would have been making sure that communication line was open. We are very lucky, as each of our services have a volunteer coordinator. Our coordinator is the volunteer manager, so they do have that kind of personal relationship with our volunteers. It means that they are the first point of contact for them, and they hopefully have built up a rapport with them to be able to go and have conversations if they are feeling like they're struggling or anything like that. And it was really important whilst remote working, because a lot of our staff weren't in the office as much. So it was about making sure that volunteers were happy enough to use Zoom, happy enough to do phone calls, and making sure staff, when they could be in the office at a social distance and safe way if they needed those conversations to be had. And then also in terms of well-being, that was obviously really important for us, for our volunteers. We, especially for those that were at home, a lot of our volunteers who were doing the safe and well calls did quite struggle. I think a lot of everyone who was shielding and out in the community, a lot of our service users had a lot, from what we were used to, had more high intense mental health needs. Due to the pandemic, people were feeling more depressed and all the rest of it, because they had to stay inside. And it was important that our volunteers were being looked after, because I knew it was getting quite intense for them. So we have a psychosocial practitioner who works for the Red Cross on a Thursday. So every Thursday we set up Zoom calls with him that all the volunteers could call into, and it gave them an opportunity to kind of speak to someone on a professional stance of what to do, and talk about maybe experiences that they've had with service users, and knowing that they were having the right approach when they were speaking to them on the phone. We also had a very clear escalation guidance. So say you were speaking to a service user with really high mental health needs, we made it really clear to our volunteers when they needed to escalate the phone call, when it was too high mental health needs, more than what we could do, because at the end of the day, we weren't counsellors by any means. So it was important that we were making that really clear to them, so they knew that they didn't have to, they could get more help if they needed to. We also did just regular weekly Zoom check-ins with all the volunteers. That was just a drop-in, and it just was really just a chat, just so that people could vent or just catch up with each other. We also had some wellbeing tools and workshops on our online systems that were free to access for our volunteers. And the Red Cross actually provided us with free membership to the Headspace app, which is a mindfulness and wellbeing app. So I know quite a lot of our volunteers took that up and it was really useful to them. The Red Cross nationally also set up free counselling for volunteers and staff, and also provided that free counselling service for family members of volunteers or staff. So that was really good as well, because then it meant that, you know, volunteers did feel supported in their own personal lives as well. And then we also have a national support line. So even if volunteers maybe felt that they couldn't speak to their coordinator or volunteer manager about something, they could phone the national support line and have a talk to them on that. So that's pretty much everything that we had in place, and we're still doing that. We're not doing food packs or medication deliveries anymore. We're just doing the safe and well calls and the assisted shopping services. So those systems are still in place and are still changing as the restrictions change, as you all know. But I think it worked really well for us, and we still do those debriefs. So if the volunteers do feel like they need more support, we have been able to try and facilitate that. For example, we've organised a mental health first aid course, because a lot of the people who were doing the safe and well calls weren't sure kind of how to react in those kind of extreme situations. So we have been trying to support people as much as we can.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was great. I suppose the one big message that I certainly picked up was communication. You have communicated with your volunteers the whole way through, talked, checked in, chatted, give them guidance and all the rest. So that certainly for me is the big thing that has come out, but we can come back to that afterwards. Elaine, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and for you maybe to share your experiences from Good Morning Carrick. Is it Good Morning Carrick, Good Morning Carrick Fergus?
Either
or.
Especially Carrick Fergus, but I don't think anybody says Carrick Fergus nowadays. So hi, I'm Elaine Rajkumar. I'm the coordinator for Good Morning Carrick Fergus. So we are we aren't as big as Good Morning Ballymena, but we cover a good area, and we have about 18 volunteers at the minute. So obviously when the lockdown started, we had to really think differently, because we have never been fond of working from home, because we need to protect our data, and we have to be sure that people are, doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we had no choice. So to continue working, we had to adapt, because our volunteers are mostly over 70. We have a couple of volunteers under 70, but again, health issues of family members and themselves, they had to shield. So basically they were all shielding. So we were able to set up remote working then, and the volunteers would usually do one or shift a week or per fortnight. So really it was just checking in with them after each shift. We would check in with them just to make sure they had no issues with the calls they were making, or issues with their own health. Really, they were not carrying out any visits. All visits were stopped. Home visits were stopped, so they weren't carrying out any visits. But shopping now and again did happen, but obviously they would be using their PPE and being distanced from people, not going into people's homes. So we offered them financial compensation for the extra phone calls, because our referrals jumped to 45 referrals in a month. So our calls were going up from maybe 60 odd a day to well over 90, 100 a day. You know, that's quite a big volume, but volunteers being volunteers, none of them were keen to take up nobody would put in expenses. So that because they wouldn't, we decided we would treat them. So because you have to look after their mental health, looking after their mental health as well as their safety, keeping them encouraged to volunteer. So I was able to visit each one of them, and we took them homemade cupcakes and flowers and things like that, you know. So we also had I organized a socially distanced coffee morning in our car park. So it turned into a 3-hour chin wag. It was the best thing because because would only be 2 or 3 people in the office each day. We very rarely get to see each other. So it was great to catch up with things that had nothing to do with what we do. You know, it was just our personal experiences of the lockdown and that. And so when the lockdown was coming to an end there, we gave them the option to come back to the office if they wished, because our office is big enough. There's plenty of space. We have screens up between each of the phones. But a few of them came back, but at the minute we only have 2 people coming in, one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, and myself in the office. I would be here every day because I could not work from home. It was destroying me mentally, to be honest. But yeah, so looking after them, I think coming up to Christmas now, again, we've decided to supply each one of our volunteers with a hamper. We have to keep them encouraged because working from home isn't easy. As Robin was saying, dealing with the calls every day, and maybe they're making 60 calls, and some of the calls it could be quite tough. So we have to look after their mental health as well as their physical health. And really, I don't really have a lot to say about it because they're all shielding. I didn't really have a lot to do other than just keep checking in on them and keeping their mental health and making them feel included and not isolated themselves.
Good. Well, that's finally, and again, you know, there's a similarity coming out in terms of the whole idea of communication is absolutely essential, very much in terms of, you know, we're talking about safety today, but you're very clearly saying it's about the mental health and making sure the volunteers are okay in relation to that. And all the thank yous, I very much picked up on, you know, what you said about keeping them encouraged to volunteer, and the thank yous, the hamper, whatever, is just a small way of recognizing what they're doing and as you say, also motivating them.
Yeah, also just keeping them up to date with the information that's coming. You know, I would be getting calls daily basis. This one's gone into hospital, that one's not well, you know, bereavements. It's just keeping them up to date with all that too, because when they're in the office, you know, we can chat about those things, but it's just emailing them, texting them, you know, lots of ways just to keep communication open.
Okay, no, thank you, Elaine. I'm going to ask Ruth now to come in with some of the more safeguarding ideas in terms of, because as I said at the start, unfortunately, we experienced quite early on, we experienced the fact that people were actually using it to take advantage of others. And I know you'll all be familiar with lots of the scams and things that were going on. So we just thought it was useful just to maybe share some of our learning in terms of safeguarding. And again, thinking about keeping the volunteers safe, but also making sure when they go out, they're making sure the people they're working with are safe as well. So thanks, Ruth.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone this morning. So, I mean, I'm really reiterating what Robin and Elaine have both said already. You know, safeguarding risks have undoubtedly increased during the pandemic. I think we're all very well aware of that. Robin had mentioned about, you know, the kids being home at school during lockdown. People are out of work possibly, and there's financial problems. People are spending more time online, children and adults. And also there's less face-to-face interaction, and that could be because people are shielded, our services are reduced or can't be delivered. So, you know, that isolation, those risks are increased substantially. So as well as safeguarding against the virus, we also need to actually think about safeguarding our volunteers, our staff and our service users against abuse. And the key message, as we've already said, is about keeping connected. It is about thinking, how can we still keep in touch with people here? And Robin and Elaine both talked about those check-ins and those debriefs with volunteers and, you know, regularly checking in that things are going okay. because some of you may have had to change your service delivery to online, maybe via Zoom, via Teams, or some of you might have had to take on new roles that your volunteers have never done before. So, you know, whilst most of the safeguarding messages stay the same in terms of identifying categories, reporting concerns, there are additional considerations that you need to take into account if you have changed your services or taken on new ones. So I suppose it was just a reminder this morning to think about all of that and look at your policy and your procedures. You know, does your code of behaviour, Robin had mentioned about updated guidelines, does your code of behaviour actually reflect any new services that you've taken on or a change in your service delivery? For example, if people are communicating online, what are the additional risks you need to think about? Well, one of those is, of course, the platform you use. Are there settings and things that you can introduce in that platform that will protect the volunteer and the service user? So simple things like who has control of the meeting. People are put into a waiting room so you can monitor who's coming in, who's coming out, passwords, meeting IDs, so that only those invited can come along. I'm sure you'll all be aware of the term Zoom bombing that's floating about at the minute. So making sure that only those who are supposed to be in that communication are there. You can actually exclude people. Thankfully, I've never had to do that. But worst case scenario, you know, if someone, for example, was to share something inappropriately when you're in a meeting, how can you exclude that person? And before that, you can control who shares the screen. You can control who's host. So really getting familiar with that platform that you're using is key in terms of online communication, and particularly if it's in relation to children and young people, because we know children and young people might share things that think it's funny, but could be inappropriate at the same time. So, and monitoring everybody that's coming in and out of that. Other things that you need to think about, I mean, are guidelines. That really is about code of behaviour and expectations. Do both parties, or if it's a group that's coming along to get involved in activity, do they all know what's expected of them in terms of behaviour? Some of the code of behaviour that you have for your day-to-day activities will be the same, but others in terms of the settings of that platform might need to be introduced. And, you know, children and young people in particular, where there's any sort of live streaming, just need to be reminded that everybody can hear it and everybody can see it. And if sessions are being recorded, for example, for any reason, that it will be there. So those general things that sometimes they're not aware of. Obviously consent as well, if there's young people involved. Have you got consent for this? You know, I think it was possibly Elaine that mentioned, you know, people like different methods of communication. So you might find some of your volunteers are nervous about going online. Maybe they do prefer going down the route of contact over the telephone. So it's taken into account different people's wishes. And obviously those guidelines are so important. So looking at your code of behaviour, and as I say, building in anything you have to make it safe. And of course, reminding people about those core principles. You know, if you are interacting with someone online and you notice possible indicators, you hear something in the background that gives you concern, they make a disclosure that they're being abused. Everybody should be clear about what to do in those circumstances, and hopefully they'll know already if they're a volunteer with your organisation. But when you're recruiting new people, I know we had to get lots of people active quickly. How do you get that information out, the right amount of information, but quickly before they start their role, so that they're not unprepared should they come across a situation like this? So Robin had mentioned some of their e-learning courses. We also have some really useful short online courses. Some of you may have done them yourselves or referred people to them. They're free. We've got one called See Something, Say Something, which is really useful in terms of adult safeguarding. We've got one called Keeping Children Safe, Reporting Concerns. So people can go on, volunteer, staff, and complete them in their own time. And there's a short knowledge check at the end and they can receive a certificate, but they're really useful to get that information out quickly. And there's the flexibility of people doing it in their own time. Then, of course, we can deliver longer courses if you wish. We're doing live delivery as well. So there's lots of different options. But, you know, are you comfortable that your staff and volunteers that you've brought on to deliver these services are clear about what to do if they have concerns? Other challenges you might come across, you know, we mentioned the shopping rules there as well. And Robin mentioned some of the challenges around, you know, managing cash, you know, thinking about how you do that safely, because that might not have been something that your volunteers do before. And I should have said, we've got lots of resources on our website that can help you with all of this as well. We've got some COVID specific ones. Some of you are nodding, you've maybe seen them already. But simple things, you know, like sticking to arrangements, call with the person the time you agreed, you know, make sure that they have their cash ready in the envelope, tell them you're outside, they can leave it out. It's useful for a volunteer to take a photograph of what's in the envelope, go and do the shopping, take another photograph just for their own records, and let the person know where everything has been left for them. So just those things, you know, how do we keep people safe if they're managing cash? And also in terms of shopping and communication online, you know, recruitment and selection might change a little bit. So for example, you might need to think about police checks for some of those roles where maybe it wasn't relevant before. There's maybe eligibility now. So shopping would fall under that assistance with general household matters. Online communication, say for example, children and young people, if it's unsupervised, and it's any sort of teaching, instructing, you know, that could fall under regulated activity. So it's thinking about safeguarding, you know, in its widest sense around all of this, thinking about everything you do from the volunteer, from you start to try and bring them into your organisation till they actually get into their role. What are the safeguarding considerations that we need to think about? So, you know, there's lots of information there. As I said, it was really just to talk through those key issues and some tips. It really is about thinking where there has been a change, because where there's a change, there are always risks. So it's keeping up to date with all of that and helping to protect your volunteers as well as those who are receiving the service. We do actually have a useful fact sheet for service users as well around offers of help, because as Sandra mentioned there, we know there are lots of scams happening, and unfortunately we know offers of help are not always genuine. So we would encourage you, if you are carrying out any sort of service delivery for people who might be isolated and at risk, to share that resource with them, and that gives them some basic information about what to do if they're concerned. That's the other part to this as well. You know, we focused a wee bit on what volunteers need to know, but also those receiving the services, they need to be clear about expectations as well, what the volunteer is there to do, and who should they contact if they have a concern or a volunteer has acted inappropriately or they have a complaint to make. You know, and again, thinking about how you get that information out quickly to people. But keeping connected is key. Keeping connected and boundaries. It's really examining those to make sure that everybody is safe. And of course, anything new that you're taking on, just making sure that your insurance covers those activities as well. But we've lots of useful documents there online. But I think that is just a quick overview of what I wanted to say, because I want to leave some time for questions. So hopefully that all made sense, okay?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so much to think about, isn't there? We've had so much on our plates over this past few months, and then, you know, the guidelines, as somebody said earlier, the guidelines, you know, we're changing so often, and now in Northern Ireland we're going into a period on the 27th of November. I'm not sure that any of us really know exactly what it completely means. Certainly I'm going into a meeting at 1:30 with the department to look at what those new guidelines mean in relation to volunteering. So if there's anything I hear this afternoon, I will be sharing that with our membership and certainly with you guys later as well. And after these sessions, we always send out updated information or links or whatever to anything that we've talked about. So I'll make sure that those resources that Ruth has talked about are included in the information which goes out after this meeting. So the floor is open. There's a lot of expertise in this room. A lot of people have been doing so many in this room, on the screen, whatever, in these rooms. You know, a lot of people have been doing different things over the past few months. You've been having to deal with lots of different issues. So you have probably learned as you've gone along, but you've built up a lot of expertise. Please, now is an opportunity to, ask some questions of other people in the room. And if there's anything that it's been concerning you, throw it out there. We may not have the answers today. We can certainly think about it, and certainly we can go away and find the answer if we don't know today. But certainly if you want to hear a wee bit more about what you've heard this morning, please go on ahead. I'm going to, just because I've got the chair here, I'm going to ask Robin a question just to kick it off. I would like Robin to hear a wee bit more. You mentioned about your check-in service. So my understanding what you were saying is, if I was to go out and do something, then there is a check-in. I'm interested to know, is that by text or is it by talking to someone? What way does that work?
So each service did it differently. I know that a couple of services did do it, made a WhatsApp group, had all the volunteers and the staff members that were on that service in the WhatsApp group. And then they put in the WhatsApp group, just finished, blah, blah, blah. And we also then recorded that on our Teams, just so that we could make sure that everyone, there was a time that they did check in and a time that they didn't. A lot of our volunteers who maybe knew the coordinator personally, would just phone them and say, listen, I'm just finished my shift here. I'm just going to head home. This is what happened and this is how it went. And then it would be up to that coordinator to make a note of how they spoke and how the conversation went with the volunteers.
Good. Do you have a system in place? Ruth will laugh because we've been around the roads with this so many times, but do you have a system in place that if somebody genuinely forgets to contact you when they've finished doing what they're doing, or indeed, they just, what do you do if somebody doesn't put in the WhatsApp saying, right, I'm finished, I've done that, all good?
I would probably personally just check in with them until I could get a hold of them. This has been the same issue has been with us, and we are introducing a lone working app that's going to come out after Christmas, and that is going to be like compulsory for volunteers to use that when they're on shift, because there hasn't been with my services, but there could be an incident where something happens and then we're not going to have any record of that. But I must say now, the volunteers that we've been working with have been good at checking in with you. It just is a case of kind of hounding them a little bit until you hear back from them.
Yeah, it's getting it into the process. And that's what you do when you finish what you do. No, that's helpful, Robin. It's always good to know that other people are sharing the same pain.
Yeah, definitely.
It certainly seems, Robin, that you are really embracing technology with all of this. If you're talking about a few different apps there, but yes, it's about knowing where people are. As Sandra says, knowing that people are okay. So
yeah, and don't get me wrong, we do have a lot of volunteers that are not technology savvy whatsoever, but it is kind of about being flexible around those people that aren't and making sure that they feel supported in other ways. I have one volunteer that doesn't have a computer, doesn't have an email address, literally just uses his landline phone. So it was just, when it came to like e-learning and supporting him with training, it was just about finding other ways around that. So our learning and development team luckily did some of the Zoom calls by phone, and then you would post him out the slides, something like that, so that they still feel included and get the right support that they need.
Excellent. Okay, anybody else want to wave if they want to ask a question? I will try and spot you. Oh my goodness. Elaine Gilmer. Sorry, two Elaines.
So I work for the Northern Trust in the volunteer team. It's just really, we had advertised to do like a coffee and catch up morning and a couple of workshops and things, and the uptake has been really, really poor. So I'm wondering, a lot of our volunteers would be older, so I'm not sure if it's the Zoom is the problem, if it's maybe they don't have the technology and stuff. So I'm just wondering, has anybody else tried to run anything with their volunteers, and has Zoom been a problem, or the technology, or we're kind of stumped as to what we were quite surprised that the uptake was so poor, because we thought they'd be dying to get linking in with other volunteers, which they've told us on the phone they are. So we're going to have to do a wee bit of scoping to see what the problem is. But just a thought of what anybody else had any issues with that.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Any experience?
Well, as our volunteers are all older as well. The couple of younger ones that we would have are working, so they only volunteer on their day off. But we've found that they don't use the technology. I mean, even personally myself, I'm not great with it, to be honest. I get my daughter to help me, but I think if you not got a venue that's big enough to socially distance people, no.
Probably not.
Well, I know you
That's-
won't
and
be able
then-
to use it at the minute, but maybe after this current lockdown. No.
Yeah, possibly.
Depend on numbers.
Because it's the trust as well, we have to be very careful and making sure that we
Yeah.
are adhering to all the guidelines.
I
And
know.
then there's different groups of volunteers, which it might work better, splitting them up into their volunteering roles and meeting
Mhm.
up. But it would all have to be done outside and things. And then at the minute with
Well, the
we just
weather's
don't
not
have the
great.
weather and things and like that.
Yeah.
So I think virtually is the way that is what we want to go initially. But
I do think people are put off by virtual because it's just not the same.
no.
You don't have the same interaction as seeing people face to face. And whenever it's sort of at the minute we've been delivering winter packs to our service users, and the volunteers have been helping me to do that. So they're coming up and picking up, they're doing a face-to-face visit with the service users, and they are the volunteers are getting as much out of it because it is that face-to-face. Even if it is only at the doorstep, so
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's something that you would need to think about doing maybe when the weather's better and you can meet outside.
Yeah.
Anybody any experience of doing virtual meetings now? Anybody else?
Sandra, it's Paula here.
Paula.
Guide Dogs. Yeah, I would have to agree with Elaine. We've had a few virtual kind of get-togethers, and I think volunteers have been really intimidated by it, and just kind of chatting to them. Some of them have said that before lockdown, before this madness started, we would have had cafes and people would have came and they were really successful for people just coming and chatting. The dynamic on Zoom is very, very different. It's very hard to sit and have a cup of tea and be part of the conversation virtually, so the structure we found had to be very, very different for online sessions. So it wasn't just a case of saying, okay, we're having a get together, just come and join. What we've found has been more successful is when we've had a theme. So we've had like a speaker, we've had, maybe we've had some people, we've had a structured event with some of our service users about the challenges they face with their volunteers. We've looked at things like listening skills, we've looked at things like dealing with stress during the pandemic. And we've found that when we've had that kind of structure, it's encouraged people to come along without the emphasis on them to be social in this really intimidating artificial situation. And then what we've found afterwards, we've had the speaker, we've had a kind of a wee bit of a feedback, and people start to loosen up. So there is a bit more crack, but I personally have never really achieved that sense of comfort and easygoingness that you have with a face-to-face when you have 10 or 20 people even in a room, just simply having a chat and a cup of coffee. So I think with the online stuff, there has to be that much more of a direction to it, that much more of a structure to it, so you can support people through it. Because I would hate to go to it, but personally, I hate Zoom with a passion, but it's now my new best friend. It is with everybody, but I would feel really comfortable myself just going to have like a cup of coffee with a group of people that I didn't really know that well. So just an answer daily, and I would suggest that kind of structure, that kind of theme. I think it encourages people, it takes the emphasis on people thinking, I'm going to be sitting there like a plant, and how do you talk, how do you communicate, what's going to happen? But when you have a structure, it reassures people.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point, Paula. We've done some of that in Volunteer Now with some of our groups where we have done events, and yes, we've had cookery demonstrations and people talking about particular health issues and things like that. And we were surprised. It was a men's health day that we did, and it was for older men, and we were blown away by the participation in the end. But now I would also say, Elaine, that we put a lot of work in at the early days trying to help those people get connected and become comfortable with being able to use Zoom. You know, but it is a challenge. I don't think any of us particularly like it compared to what we're used to. But unfortunately, it is the way to go. Ruth, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what yourself and Paula said there, certainly in terms of the themes and structure is so important, but also what we found, and this is in terms of delivering training too, but not just training, you know, numbers are key as well. Maybe running a series of sessions with small numbers, because numbers really, really make a difference. As Paula said, you know, we'll probably never be able to replicate what we do in face-to-face interaction, but if the numbers are smaller, it's a lot easier to manage. And there is sometimes a wee bit more interaction because people feel they've time to speak and they're not sitting looking at everyone else. And maybe a prompt from the organizer to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to say something, you know, would be good. So numbers, I think, are key as well. So maybe organizing a series of smaller groups might, and if people are reassured that there are only so many numbers per group, it might encourage them a wee bit more. But there's lots of challenges, you know, we've already talked about. We have to be mindful that there are some people that just don't have the technology, or there could be people that have laptops but their cameras aren't working. You know, there could be issues with connecting. So I think we've all learned to be very patient with technology over the last few months. And I suppose if you can provide any sort of support to people in terms of joining a session, even in ones or twos, you know, sometimes it only takes half an hour maybe with someone to take them through the basics, if you can talk them through it, just to give them that added reassurance. So
thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Anybody else? Any comments, questions?
Sandy, can I just make a point? So it's Paul again. I'm not putting on my camera because I have two mad dogs in the background and they're fighting and everything. So
we would love to see them.
You can have them if you want. In terms of keeping volunteers safe, I think I was off for a few weeks now, just coming back and just chatting to some volunteers who previously did face-to-face work and have now been doing keeping in touch calls. One of the things that I've kind of been highlighted to me over the last week of being back in post is that our volunteers are doing so much more than they originally signed up for, and that whole issue of safeguarding as well. So it's the keeping them safe within the boundaries of their role, which has changed and morphed and evolved because of the pandemic, but also as well just being mindful now that they'll also have to make that transition back next year as well to the original role that they signed up for. And I'm just concerned that, you know, that the volunteers have been so valuable, and this work with, you know, the support that we have obviously as an organization have done over the last few months would not have been possible with them. See, I told you, there we go. But it's just about how we rebuild them again emotionally to continue to support people. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to unmute.
You're okay. Okay, anybody, any thoughts on that one? Because I think like it's burnout. Burnout is a real possibility. Anybody, any thoughts or comments on that to help Paula?
We have experienced this with our volunteers that are doing the Safe and Well calls, and we just kind of said, would you like to maybe swap service users that you're speaking to, or would you maybe like to try something else? So it could be just getting them a role for like an interim role for a little while they are facing that burnout, because I do think, especially whenever you are supporting people at home who are also at home and are also, you know, these are both kind of feeling down and all the rest of it, it is important to kind of let you have that break as well, let volunteers have that break.
Perfect. Yeah. Anybody else?
No, I was just going to say, we work on a 2-month rota, so when I'm making out the rota, I'm very conscious of trying to give people a week off, or again, volunteers can take off as much time as they like. You know, we do have a couple of volunteers who have, they have family members going through serious illness at the minute, so we're just trying to be very mindful of them taking time off at the last minute and make sure that we have, process in place to cover that time that they're, because there's only 2 on every day, we need to have a backup really, and sometimes we put 3 on if the calls seem to be getting quite long. A lot of our volunteers, because they're at home, they can just log on at any time to the system now and help the other ones out. We've also said that because this working from home has worked much better than we ever thought it would for the volunteers, we've just said to them, even after we get back to normal working arrangements, if they want to continue working from home, they can. If some of them, they don't like coming out. We start at 8:30 in the morning. Some of them don't like driving on the icy weather, and that sort of thing. So we're giving them the option to stay at home. And we've also just last week had a call from a former volunteer who suffers quite badly with MS, and the reason she had to give up because she just couldn't drive anymore. So she has got in touch with to see if it is possible for her to come back as a volunteer but working from home. And I think that is a good thing that has come out of that for us, because we never tried this before. It has proved to be great, and it will open up opportunities for other volunteers then that aren't as mobile.
I think that's absolutely right, Elaine. I think in relation to a lot of things, it has developed this whole idea that things can be done virtually. As we said earlier, we mightn't particularly like it, but certainly we can do things in a different way. And certainly the whole idea of virtual volunteering roles, I think, will become even greater over the next few months. And I suppose in answer to Paula's point as well, I do think now is a chance to look at, can you expand your teams? Because in actual fact, there are volunteers who will definitely get burnout. We are finding, we're talking to people and we're hearing that some volunteers are taking the opportunity now, people who have maybe been stepped down, they're taking the opportunity to say, do you know what? I actually don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to retire. So those sorts of things I think are going to have an impact on your teams. So do think about recruiting more volunteers now in order to share that load. And as always, I will give a plug to Be Collective. Go to our website or lift the phone and talk to our team and say, look, I need more volunteers, because remember when the pandemic happened, we recruited lots of volunteers, many who didn't get opportunities because of other things going on across the province. People needs were being met. So there are people out there who want to volunteer. You just got to find them. Anybody else? You're very quiet today. But our time is up. So if there are no other burning issues, I will thank you for coming today. Thank you for giving us the hour to talk about this really important issue. I will send out some information, if not later today in the morning, just to follow up on some of the information that we've talked about today, just so as you have everything to hand. As always, we're here to help. If there's anything that didn't get covered today, anything you're thinking about, do get in touch and tell us. If there's a topic that you would like us to address in the new year, again, please come and talk to us, tell us, so as we can look into it and put that on for you. Our next session is on the, oh crikey, it's in December, which is only next week. So that's the 3rd of December, and we're going to be looking at the issue of incentivization and volunteering. Is it a paradox? So that's a little different one for you than what we've been talking today. But I want to thank Robin and Elaine and Ruth for sharing their experiences today in terms of keeping volunteers safe. And again, just thank you to all of you for coming and for participating. And we'll talk soon, I hope. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.